Hello, everyone, and welcome to South Asian Artists in Conversation with Shalina Patel. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to be speaking about the relationship and the importance of history and the arts. So, if you could just introduce yourself and tell everyone who you are.
Hi everyone, I'm Shalina Patel. My day job is I'm a secondary school history teacher, but I'm also a writer. I make documentaries and just all round history nerd really, but especially about South Asian history and the history of the empire.
Amazing. And what made you want to actually go into teaching history?
I really started loving history when I was doing my GCSEs, and I just knew that it was a degree that I wanted to do at university. Didn't really know what I wanted to do afterwards. I went to LSE for context, so anyone that knows anything about LSE knows that everyone there kind of goes into banking essentially or law, and I knew that I didn't want to do either of those. And I volunteered in secondary schools whilst I was at uni, and yeah, my supervisor just kind of said, "Oh, I thought you wanted to be a teacher," and I was like, "Oh, did I?" And I think I, to this day, think he got me confused with someone else. But I basically just looked. I literally Googled it, decided, yeah, you know what, I'll do it for a couple of years, and then figure out what I want to do. And then I guess what's kind of happened is I kind of have two jobs now. So I think I sort of I haven't had to leave teaching because I'm very, very lucky that my school's really supportive of allowing me to do all these other things. So now I feel like I'm kind of a history teacher in the classroom, but I'm also a public historian as well. So I'm very lucky that I get to do really cool projects with some really cool South Asian creatives in particular. And I'm writing a book as well, which will be out next year. So I feel like I've kind of stayed in history teaching because I've also been able to kind of foster all these other loves and nerdy sort of things that I want to do.
Yeah, so it was a little bit sort of like, was it a thing you always knew? It was kind of like you said, it was a little bit late. You kind of figured out later on that that's something you want to do.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, basically, I loved teaching. I thought I would do it for, like I said, I thought I'd do it for a couple of years, and I thought maybe I'd do something else. But I love being in the classroom, even if it's the afternoon and it's year 9. Like I love teaching. I love the challenge of thinking about, okay, I want to teach this particular topic to, let's say, year 9. How am I going to do that? And I'm very lucky that I work with the most incredible history department at my school, who all are really, really passionate about, particularly about hidden histories. I think that's what's really exciting, is that, we don't teach lessons from textbooks. We read, historians' work, we go out and research. And so I guess, relating to what we're talking about, there's a real creativity to teaching, or it can be if you want it to be. I feel like definitely in my department, it's really creative because, as a teacher, we have to think, first of all, how do I turn this really complicated history into something that is manageable for young people, but also that sanitizes it appropriately, of course, because you can't, there's, for example, when you think about teaching partition and the Holocaust, tragic events like this, you can't teach them everything about it because it's not appropriate to do so. So that's a real challenge there. But it's also about thinking about actually whose stories do we maybe not normally talk about when we talk about these particular experiences, but also what are the kind of musical elements to this particular history. What are the images that we can show the students to really bring it to life? And I feel like that creativity, I've not lost that. And I guess I've been teaching for 14 years now, which I taught my first lesson. I taught my first lesson at Claremont when I was 21, which is
Really
insane.
oh my God. Props to you for that.
I literally left uni, and the sixth formers that I taught were 3 years younger than me.
No way.
Which is really bizarre to think about it now. But I think teaching history certainly allows me to be really creative, and then I'm very lucky that I've been able to take that creativity and sort of take it out of the classroom now, with a lot of the projects that I do. So this is not the path that I was expecting. No one goes into teaching thinking that it's going to lead to kind of a secondary career. I never would have thought that I would have have an agent, and I have a publishing deal, and my face is I'm on documentaries and stuff like that, and I never would have thought that was not my intention. This was not my intention at all. But I feel like what really changed things for me is I won a National Teaching Award in 2018, and that really gave me a platform to talk about hidden histories and to talk about women and to talk about South Asian women in particular. And I feel like that really opened some doors for me. And my head teacher was so supportive and just said, use this opportunity to talk about what you want to talk about. And it's led me to doing all this cool stuff. So yeah, very, very lucky. And anyone that's sort of, I always like to plug teaching, like anyone that's listening thinking, maybe I could be a teacher. I think, you know, it's not for everyone. It's really not. But if you've got, if it works, and if there's something, you know, if you've got it in the classroom, then I think, you know, we need more creative people in the profession, definitely. So I encourage people to look into it if they, I think that it sounds good.
And I really like that you said that you kind of all got the same mindset and in the same history department, so you teach in a similar way, which I think is so important. But like you said as well, it's, you know, you're teaching young children, so you have to find a way to make it accurate, but for a way that's, you know, if you're talking about sensitive topics as well, you've got to obviously make sure you're doing it in the right way to teach younger children. So there is a lot to think about when it comes to sort of teaching history, like in that creative way, as you said. And sort of moving on to the platform that you mentioned, so the history corridor. Obviously you said you didn't know that was going to happen, so how did that actually come about?
Yeah, that was kind of one of the, that was basically, it was basically a lockdown project.
Okay.
You know, lockdown happened, and I had always, I'd kind of started writing in kind of educational like magazines and stuff like that, and speaking to other history teachers about the kind of history that that we teach in our school, and how we were encouraging other teachers to do that. And then I was really keen to kind of build on the fact that whenever I sort of, you know, when you go to like a party or something and you meet people that you don't really know and you have small talk, and obviously if you ever are a teacher in that situation, everyone always gravitates to you because everyone's been to school, so everyone's kind of like, oh, you know, so I feel like there's like a common thing. And I feel like every time I went to like a party or met new people, they just be like, oh, I didn't realize that's what they teach, that you know, that I didn't realize that's the history that you teach in schools now. You know, I wish you'd been my history teacher. And I feel like I hear that comment all the time, like I wish I'd learned this history at school. And so it was just in conversation with a couple of people in the department, we were like, should we start an Instagram account? And initially, which is quite funny, originally this Instagram account was meant to be for us and our sixth form students, to keep them interested in sort of history outside of their A levels. Basically, we wanted to kind of keep that going. And then I don't know what happened, because I famously don't follow anyone on the history corridor. We follow 0 people, but it's just literally organically happened, because I think it's a faceless Instagram, so my face is on it occasionally when I like do events and like stuff like this, but otherwise like you can go on it and I haven't got my name on it or anything, but I think that helps.
Knows that it's like,
no one knows.
People know it's you, but it's
like people, it's one of those, like, if you know, you know, like if you know it's me, then you know, otherwise you don't know. I think it was also just, you know, all schools were shut down, a lot of, you know, people were working from home, and I think it was also when kind of all the like Black Lives Matter resurgence was happening, and there was this big questioning of what are we, you know, especially with the Edward Colston statue, you know, people sort of saying, well, what is this link between Britain and the slave trade? It's like, oh my God, how do people not know? And I think that really helped kind of propel everything, because people just shared it. It's really as simple as, it was the right time. It was like a vortex of like the right time in the right place. And everyone being at home, and everyone sort of loving the kind of daily history lesson we were giving people. And we started off talking about the empire really, and Black British history and South Asian history. And then it's just kind of spiraled from there. I have taken a little bit of a step back from it since I've been writing my book, obviously. But it's such a brilliant, you know, platform to kind of get people just interested in history. And I think it is one of those things where it's, even though we have the internet and all that kind of thing, I do think it's really hard for people to find kind of accessible, bite-sized history that's kind of not aimed at children, but that's not really academic either. I think, you know, not everyone has time to, you know, if you go to like a history book, if like the history section in a bookshop, it's usually, which obviously fantastic, but it's usually really niche. Like you can't just find a general book about World War II, for example. It's usually about a specific person at a specific time in a specific year in the war, you know. So I think people like that. I like to think of it as like you read a post about something, and if you're interested in it, you might then think, oh, maybe I'll see if there's a documentary about that. Maybe I'll see if there is a book about that. So I think it kind of it really fell into place at the right time, I think. And I haven't, you know, I'm very, very lucky that people always ask me like, do you get sort of any negativity or, and I'm very lucky that occasionally someone will comment something really occasionally someone will comment something really weird. Yeah, sometimes, but it's very few and far between, and it's very random a lot of the time. So I'll just like delete. It happens very, very, very infrequently. But otherwise, I have to say that everyone's so positive, and I would say the other thing I would say is that people tend to be very, very apologetic, which I find really interesting. Like people tend to be very like, oh God, I'm so embarrassed that I didn't know this.
Yeah.
And I always say to people, please don't apologize, because it's actually still really hard to find out some of this information, particularly some of the women that I post about. It's generally speaking, very few people have heard of any of these women at all. So I always say to people, don't apologize, because I wasn't taught any of this stuff at school either, and actually we do, things are changing, but we do still seem to be churning out the same films and the same documentaries, etc. So
the same kind of topics as well that I feel like
all the same stories. Yeah, the same stories within those topics. I saw a thread on Twitter the other day about, I can't remember, it was a historian that was commenting about like, oh, here's another World War II documentary about the same kind of people. It's like, it's such an important context, but why aren't we telling the stories of Noor Khan, the spy in World War II? Why aren't we telling the story of the Sikh pilots in World War II? It's one of those things.
There's so many other stories that can be told. It's like we want to see new stories that are more undiscovered. And I feel like lockdown was such an amazing time for platforms to be created, because everyone had a bit more time to connect with other people and to actually like discover those platforms. Like this platform was created in lockdown as well. So I think that's amazing. It started from then. And what kind of things has the platform kind of allowed you to do, in the sense of like events and stuff like that?
I think I think it's kind of like a combination of all the things. I think because some people don't know that I run the History Corridor. I think a lot of people think that a lot of the stuff that has happened is because of the History Corridor, but actually it's kind of the History Corridor. I feel like is always a bonus to all the stuff that I've been able to do, which is great. I think it's, I think the biggest thing about the History Corridor is it's connected me to so many interesting people, and especially I would say it's connected me to so many interesting South Asian women, I would say in particular. It's I've made some brilliant friends actually from via the platform, just from people who are interested in history, and I've been invited to do so many kind of interesting events and things like that as a result of it. And I think I think there's some things have kind of propelled my sort of my sort of voice as a historian, I guess. So particularly when I do the Teach Me a Lesson podcast with Greg James and the BBC, that's kind of really elevated my sort of my sort of ability to be able to do events and things like that. I think the coolest stuff that I get to do is definitely the work that I do with Dishoom. Dishoom are doing such brilliant work in sort of spotlighting South Asian stories. And so I've been very, very lucky that, who would have thought that we had a film that premiered at the South Asian Film Festival recently, which was ridiculous. It was so funny actually, because I told my mum came and I told her about the film, and then afterwards she just goes, "You didn't tell me you were starring in the film." I was like, "Yeah."
Right.
So I was like, "Oh, sorry, Mum, I didn't realise you didn't know." So that was a really exciting project. That was called Luminaries, and it's created by a South Asian duo called Ramni and Samvir, who are amazing, and they basically created a short film, which was myself and Shamal, who is the owner, co-founder of Dishoom, and we told the story of Indian independence through the King's Cross restaurant. And there was an amazing animator, Gargan, who kind of animated the stuff that we were saying as well. So it's kind of a mixture of animation and myself and Shamal. The documentary is going to be available on a platform at some point for people to see. But that was a really cool project that I got to do. That short film was just, amazing. And I'm just really keen to just tell these kinds of stories, like the story of Indian independence. I feel like, I always say to people, when you think Indian independence, you think Gandhi, right? That's kind of really the only thing that you think. I mean, people, in terms of people, you think of Gandhi, you probably think about partition as well. But in terms of other people involved in that, in terms of particularly the the journey that Indian nationalists went on, you know, leading up to that moment in 47. There's so many stories to be told within that narrative. So it was really exciting to get to tell tiny elements of that story within the short film. So that's definitely one of the coolest things that I've got to do. And yeah, we've got some other things in the pipeline in the future to do with history, which is going to be great as well.
Amazing. Yeah, no, Disham, they seem to be doing loads of amazing things like that. So no, please let us know when that's out, because I'd love to
Definitely.
watch. But, no, interesting that you mentioned partition, because when I sort of think about like South Asian representation, a lot of it does seem to be the kind of same stories about partition, and like I want to, obviously it's important to tell, but it's like there's so many other stories that I want to be told. So I do hope there is like more space to tell those kind of stories as well. And sort of moving on to the next question, do you feel that it's important to have history reflected in the arts, and why do you think it is important?
Oh my God, definitely. And I think the biggest thing is, if we're thinking about it in sort of a moral education sort of standpoint, in education we talk a lot about cultural capital. Which I think people will be quite surprised to hear that we talk about that in education, but we talk about it a lot. And when we think about what cultural capital means, you know, it's that kind of social and cultural knowledge. I like to think of it as touchstones, like that those cultural touchstones that help a student to make progress. But also they are the kinds of things that help students to understand things in a more nuanced way as well. So I always think about, this is going to sound like a silly example, but I teach A-level history, and we teach a unit which goes from 1951 to 2007. And I can tell the cultural capital of the students in the room, because I will often play the music, you know, from the 70s, from the 80s, from the 90s, etc. And you can tell their cultural capital because there'll be students that will be like jamming to George Michael, you know, and like it's because their parents will have been playing that, you know.
They brought up with it.
Yeah, exactly. Or, you know, whereas I can remember one of my colleagues emailed me once and said, one of the kids has just asked me, what is a Noel Gallagher?
Oh my God.
Which I think is so funny.
Not who is he, what is he?
No, what is a Noel Gallagher? And I think, you know, that cultural capital thing is so important, because I think it's about, you know, I don't know how to word this properly, but I think, you know, for South, we can obviously speak of this as South Asians, that, you know, as young South Asians growing up in this country, we have an extra hurdle when it comes to sort of British cultural capital in lots of ways, because we have lots of heritage at home, you know, whether it be music, food, film, etc. That's in addition to, or might be in instead of, the films, music, etc. that you might have heard growing up in a different type of British family, for example. So you've got that. So I think there's that part of it, but I also think that it's so important that traditionally, you know, South Asians have not necessarily been encouraged to be creative and to be in the arts, you know. And I would say that I often get asked, do you find it challenging? Do you ever come across parents who, you know, don't want their kids to do history A-level or history at uni? And I would say we're very lucky at my school that we generally don't. I don't know whether that's because we have quite a diverse department, and whether it's just, you know, that they sort of trust us and, you know our successes and that kind of thing. So we're really lucky that we don't really face those barriers, but I do know that other schools do. But I think in terms of the arts, I think it's so important that students, you know, see themselves reflected in all types of media, you know. And I think it's that classic thing, isn't it, where my mum will still every time, like, even like Anita Rani or somebody is on TV, she'll text me and be like, she'll be like, Anita Rani looks great. She won't be like, Anita Rani's on TV, but she wants like me to know. Right now, FYI, there's a great South Asian woman on TV. Or she's like, oh, doesn't Ranveer look great, you know, and just that kind of thing. And I think it still means so much. You know, it's like my mum's generation. It still means so much for her to see, you know, Ranveer on This Morning, or to see Anita, you know, on TV, etc. And I think that's because I do feel like we're going in a different direction now, but I do still feel like we're quite we're still quite put in boxes when it comes to sort of TV and film and that sort of thing. And I think that what's so exciting is that we are living in a time where South Asians are everywhere.
Oh my God.
You know, and I would say that I've had some of those experiences. I've had some of these experiences in my 30s. So, for example, I remember the first time I went to see Rupi Kaur, and I kind of left. I got really emotional. I thought to myself, it's because I've never paid to see a South Asian woman be on stage. you know. And the same thing last year, I was lucky to see Priya Raghu, who's amazing.
Oh my
And
God. Yeah.
again,
Oh,
I was
when she was
again got really emotional and was like, I
yeah.
cannot believe that here is a South Asian woman who
Mm.
has sold out this venue, and it's full of all types of different people as well. You know, it was really, really diverse. I would say actually there were very few South Asians there.
Really?
Actually, I would say,
I
yeah.
expected, like, for especially for Rookie, it would mainly be like South Asian women going. It's
Yeah,
so good that
no,
whole.
I would say for Priya Rigu especially, it was really, really diverse. And I think, you know, we're very lucky to be living in a time where actually we've got, you know, we're kind of finally infiltrating, you know, music, for example, you know, and obviously we have had some brilliant South Asian artists, but I feel like particularly South Asian women, you know, obviously we've had MIA, but, you know, we've got some brilliant, you know, young vocalists, for example, that are coming through at the moment. And yeah, I think it's so important that young people are sort of, that young South Asians especially see that actually there are lots of different avenues that you can go down. And I think that's true. You know, for example, my brothers, shout out to my brothers, they do really creative jobs. You know, one of my brothers did product design at uni. One of my other brothers runs social media for a very large football club. And, you know, they both do really creative jobs. And I think that, again, even just in terms of that, I think it's really exciting to see that there are so many South Asians doing amazing things. You know, God, I'm in Paris at the moment. I was gutted to miss Dialed In this weekend, you know, because I went last year. You know, just things like that. It's just incredible to see these kinds of events happening, and yeah, it's such an exciting time. And I think for young people, you know, we're very lucky that I think things are definitely changing. I think in terms of cultural capital, there's certainly a lot more kind of British, South Asian and diaspora touchstones that young people have now, which is so cool, which is not like it was when I was growing up, definitely not.
And what you said about how your mum kind of messaged you every time she sees Rani, sort of kind of like a refreshing excitement, because I think in that generation there was barely anything, and I feel like it's just the past few years, because even like before lockdown, South Asians were everywhere. I feel like it's the past 2 years that there's been more prominence of us being there. So I can sort of resonate with her excitement still seeing South Asians on screen.
Yeah, definitely.
And obviously that there's still so much work. I think especially in theatre, it's
yes.
a lot more.
I would say that with theatre, I'm obsessed with the theatre. I'm absolutely obsessed with it, and I've always loved going to theatre ever since I was a kid. And it's basically every single time there's anything vaguely South Asian at the theatre, I go.
Same. I'm like, I'm on it.
I've recently, I saw Partition at the Donmar Warehouse last year, for example, which was an adaptation of Kavita Puri's book Partition Voices, which was amazing. And again, to see a South Asian story at the Donmar Warehouse, which is such a cool theatre, you know, was amazing. You know, at the National last year, I saw the kind of anniversary version of East is East, for example, and The Father, the Assassin was really good as well. We sat in our seats at the end and just were like in disbelief. It was incredible.
That is also so much that like I was ignorant to so much that happened. I was like, I didn't realize all of this happened, and it was just so nice to be educated in that way, watching Father and the Assassin as well.
Yeah, and I think I always remember a really long time ago. This must have been about 7 or 8 years ago. And at the National, there was a play called Dara, which was about one of the sons of one of the Mughals. And these actors were all South Asian, they're all men, and they were speaking it was very Shakespearean the way it had been written. And I remember just being so struck by the fact that I'd never seen anything like it. You know, and we're really lucky that there's loads of women doing great stuff in theatre at the moment as well. I've just booked to see Brown Girl Noise, which will be out soon, and I booked to see The Empress as well later in the year. So yeah, literally every time I see anything, I'm there because I absolutely love it. It's so funny actually. My partner and I, we've jokingly like written in our heads like a script for a play, which involves South Asians, which we're semi seriously thinking about like putting pen to paper and actually writing something. But I think it's really exciting that there's you know, theatre is definitely a place where I think there are really amazing projects happening that are telling kind of different South Asian stories, and there's just such talent there as well.
Yeah.
which is really incredible. I actually had an amazing meeting. Shout out to the Soho Theatre, Mark from the Soho Theatre. So his father is half Indian, I think, and he asked to have a meeting with me a few weeks ago and was like, "Tell me how we can tell more South Asian stories at Soho Theatre." I was like, "You are amazing."
Yeah.
You know, they're specifically wanting to platform, you know, our kind of voices, which is incredible. So I think there are also great sort of people in power. That's so important, isn't it? Is that there are people in positions of power who do know that we've got these kinds of stories to share.
That's a lot of the time, like, people have ideas, but it is ultimately the people with the power and the gatekeepers that are going to allow these stories to be put on. So the more of those gatekeepers that we have, the more we're going to be able to see these stories. And I know you mentioned Brown Girl Noise. Actually, I think that's part of Camden Fringe. I'm just gonna there's I think another one. It's called Asian Girls in Therapy. I think that's also going to be on.
Yeah.
If you get a chance to see that, as I recommend that one.
Yeah, I love anything that South Asian women are doing. I saw Brown Girls do it too at the Soho Theatre.
Oh, I missed that. I wanted to see that as well.
It was just amazing. I wasn't expecting. I love the podcast. I wasn't expecting it to be as moving as it was. Kind of seeing them talk. It was just incredible. So yeah, I think there's a lot of really great stuff out there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you pretty much actually covered the next question, because that was about, like, where have you seen representation done really well?
Theatre, I think is definitely one. I think there's loads of really, really amazing South Asian illustrators out there as well. Like, I follow my Instagram feed, I think, is very good. I just follow loads of really talented like artists and stuff like that. Yeah, like South Asian creatives. So I love Jatinda Creates. I know that she does a lot of stuff with English heritage as well. So she's doing a lot of work to do with, like, Hampton Court and telling kind of South Asian stories there. Manjeet App, who I met the other day, actually, because I'm actually wearing a t-shirt with one of her designs on. Shout out to Dishoom for the Trailblazers. I did an event with Dishoom a couple of weeks ago, which I hosted with Anita Anand, which is just mental that even happened. It feels like a dream. But we did an event about 3 South Asian women from history. And Manjeet has created t-shirts with each woman on, which are going to be out at the end of the month. And yeah, that's an incredible example. I think shout out to my friend Anisha as well, Anisha Palmer. She's a jewelry maker. And she makes incredible jewelry that's inspired by kind of South Asian kind of design and things like that. She did an event with Angie, who's a yoga teacher. She did an event maybe a month ago, and it was just a load of South Asian women in the room talking about jewelry that's important to them, and we kind of all shared these stories about our grandmas, basically, and it was amazing. To be able to kind of, that was a really interesting creative way of sort of storytelling through, and she does a lot of that kind of storytelling through jewelry, which I think is
I've never seen that before.
It's really she does such exciting work, and she's just done this amazing exhibition at a country home in Derby, where she sort of has visited this jewelry that essentially was stolen from India. And she did a whole project about it, and I think she was the first person to hold this jewelry, like first person of South Asian heritage to hold this jewelry in, like, however, since it was stolen. But it's just it's incredible. It's so incredible. So yeah, she tells stories through jewelry, which I think is amazing. But like I said, music, theatre, the arts, I think, there's lots of kind of exciting ways in which I think these stories are being told through kind of different platforms, and also in the mainstream. I think, we talked about partition earlier. Like, I don't know if you watched Miss Marvel, but like the partition storyline of Miss Marvel, was a really, I think it was obviously secondary to the superhero part of the story, but I think such an interesting way to tell that history, I think, as well.
And to use the platform as well for Marvel was so amazing, because
incredible.
Such a popular platform, so it's a really good way to tell the story partition. And through having, like, a South Asian superhero as well, there's like two.
I know. And the kids at school were just obsessed with Miss Marvel, rightly so.
What did you play it, like, in the classroom?
So myself and my colleague Matt, we do this thing every week where we send out like a positive news story to talk about so when Miss Marvel came out, we sent out, I think we had so many replies from teachers and from kids. Like in the PowerPoint, I'd written like, if you love Miss Marvel, come and see Miss Patel. Come and talk to her about it.
You had a whole
and I had
queue
loads
of
of
people.
kids. I had loads of kids who were like, Miss Marvel's so good. I'm like, yes, it is, guys.
So, I wish I had that when I was in school. That there's so much that I see now. It's like, if I had that, it would have been such an incredible thing to see. So I think for kids at school, seeing like a superhero representing them is so incredible.
Yeah, amazing.
And kind of now, sort of the other side of things, we've spoken about stuff that we've seen done really well. What are some sort of stories in terms of South Asian heritage that you feel is lacking and that you would love to see more of represented?
So when you sent me this question, I read the question to my partner and I said, what is my answer to this question? And he just looked at me and he said, remembrance. And I said, yeah, that's the right answer. Because so for me, remembrance is one of the biggest things I think that we're sort of missing in terms of celebrating. I think, and I say celebrating really specifically because Indian soldiers, for context, 2.5 million Indian soldiers volunteered in the Second World War. 67,000 Indian soldiers died in World War One. Like, we were there, and we were there in huge numbers. And the reason why I say celebrate is because these men were not. Yes, we have men who won Victoria Crosses and all that kind of thing, but generally speaking, these men and women, of course, were not celebrated at the time because they were fighting. Because I get it, they were fighting for the empire, and so we were also fighting for independence, and like there's all kinds of other things going on. But those lives are as worthy as the white British people that died, all the other types of people, and I think because of the fact that they were fighting for the empire and because their story was kind of lost in translation in that kind of way, I think as the diaspora that are living in this country, I think we have an absolute we have the responsibility, I think, to really remember those. And I say that because I've sold poppies with my colleague Matt every year. Obviously, I'm a history teacher too, but I wear a poppy every year. I see very few South Asians wear poppies, and I find that really infuriating because I think people were like us, died in the trenches, in Gallipoli, in and around the world in both world wars. So for me, remembrance is I'm working on a couple of remembrance things for next year because I'm really so passionate about this. So for me, remembrance is a big one.
And so do you think that you said that you don't see many like South Asian women? Do you think people genuinely don't know that there were South Asians who fought for this country, or?
I think so. I mean, I didn't know till I went to university. Because it
as well.
Yeah, I do think it's something that on the history corridor. Obviously, we talk a lot about all the different. We talk about the real world war elements of World War I and World War II. But I do still think that in the mainstream, and you know what? I think the best example of that is when 1917 came out. Right, when 1917 came out, and there was one Sikh soldier, and there was uproar from some people saying, "Why is there one?" It's like we should be talking about why there aren't thousands actually. Yeah. But sure. So I think, and that was very recently, right? That was only a few years ago that film came out. So I think that generally there's a bit of sort of, I know Satnam uses this kind of imperial amnesia phrase, and I do think that is very, very true when it comes to the world wars. Is that our kind of contribution to that has just been erased essentially? We have this myth that Britain stood alone, in 1940, but actually Britain and its empire were very much there. So I think that story for me is so important. And I also think another story that everyone listening can help with is, I think it's the first generation story. It's whoever was the first generation, parent, grandparent, set of grandparents, aunts, uncles, that first gen, I don't think really ever talked about their experiences because no one ever asked them.
No.
And so I would just say to everyone who's lucky enough to have, a grandparent still around, record them. Kavita always says to me, just record their voice on your phone or just write notes, but it will be too late at some point and you will never know because, if you ask so for me, it's my granddad, for example, who moved here in 1967. When I speak to him, if my mum's there, my mum doesn't know any of these stories. So it will get lost. And so I think I would really just urge everyone to capture those stories as much as possible, because they don't think that they are remarkable, but of course they are. You know, they're the pioneers. Like, they moved here. You know, like, I'm in France at the moment. I can't speak the language. Imagine being in the 60s, being in India, moving
Having to do
to
that,
England. You know, with your family back home, with, you know, trying to find a job. Like, you know,
They don't get enough credit for everything that.
no, because they just did it, because that's just
Yeah,
what they
well, it
did
was normal
then.
at the time, and it,
Exactly. But I think that story is so important. And again, you know, we don't have those experiences really captured in anything particularly. So I think it's so important for everyone to sort of just know what you know, your own history, you know, and everyone's, hopefully, if you've got, like I said, if you're lucky enough to have grandparents or whatever, then just write down their stories, because I think, you know, we owe them so much. You know, we are able to, you know, have conversations like this about, oh, there's not enough representation in the theatre. You know, they weren't worried about that back then. They were
No.
like, can I walk down the street without getting beaten up by a skinhead, or, you know, or can I get a job that I'm way overqualified for, but I'm being racially discriminated against? Can I rent this house in this area? No, I can't. I have to move somewhere worse. You know, so I think they went through so much, and we owe them a lot. So those stories, I think. And I'm also really interested, a final thing I'm really interested in is the diaspora, South Asian diaspora outside of the UK. So I'm really interested in, which I've talked about in my book, the kind of the South Asian diaspora, like in, you know, in Trinidad, in Guyana, that kind of Indo-Caribbean, which again is not a story, you know, that kind of indentured labour story is not one that many people know about, because people don't know about the slave trade, let alone what happened afterwards. So that's a really interesting story, I think, as well. So yeah, there's lots, but I think, yeah, the key one for me is it's got to be remembrance, because I think, so everyone who's listening, in November, wear your poppy and wear it with pride. And if anyone asks you, and I always thought, is someone gonna, okay, look, I get it. I feel like I'm always thinking, is someone gonna look at me and think, why is that brown girl wearing a poppy? In which case I will say to them, 2.5 million Indian soldiers volunteered in World War II. Or I'll say, Noor Inayat Khan was executed by the Nazis for fighting for this country. So do not tell me that I can't wear a poppy. You're wearing it for them. We've got to honour them.
What they've done for us.
And exactly.
I'm really glad you said those two things, actually, because I asked myself this question. And initially the bigger one was, as you mentioned, like grandparents and older generation stories. So one thing I really wanted to be seen done that I hadn't was a migration from India to Africa, UK.
Yes.
And I was actually in a play recently called Exodus, and it was about the Ugandan migration.
Amazing.
Uganda. So I was like, okay, I feel like not tick, but that's something that I've never seen before done. So that's one story. I'm like, okay, I'm glad. But then the other one that I've barely seen stuff on is remembrance. And again, I think there are so many people who don't know how many Indian soldiers and South Asian soldiers were involved in the war. So I think that's a really good way to educate people about that. So I really do hope there are more stories about remembrance. But no, that thank you for sharing that, and especially how you said about Guyana as well, because I think the Indo-Caribbean, that there's not enough stories about them as well. So I think
there isn't.
So many.
There's so many, honestly, like I could, you know, that's why I've written my book. Like there's so many stories that I want to dig into more and do more research on. Because it's just, I mean, and like I said, you know, for anyone that's sort of thinking, you know, oh God, there's so many stories, where do I start? I think this is the thing, is that start at home, I would say, you know, start at home. And then if you're able to, you know, if you're able to then trace anything back, then go from there. You know, it just reminds me that we recently took our classic history school trip to Belgium we took year 10, you know, and I did a little speech by the Indian soldier memorial, and I handed the wreath to a girl, and I won't say her name, I handed the wreath to a girl in year 10 who has a family history of Indian soldiers in the world wars, you know, which is very unusual. It's very unusual. But my point of saying it is that there are some families who do know. So there are some families that do know that history, which is incredible. And you never know whether that history is in your family or not.
Yeah, you don't know.
You know, you wouldn't know. So, you know, I got her to put the wreath down and took a picture, sent her grandma, you know, and I think, you know, you never know what, you know, all of our families were affected by the world wars as much as a white British family were. You know, all of our families would have been affected by partition. They would have been affected by the British Raj. They would have been affected by all manner of things. And it's, you know, so yeah, it's important to ask questions.
Yeah, for sure. And I know you mentioned sort of, in interviewing grandparents and getting, I guess, the all histories from people. So when it comes to sort of representing, what do you think needs to be taken into consideration to make sure it's accurate to the history?
Yeah, I think I know Kavita talks a lot about silence around certain topics. Like we touched on it before, didn't we, when we were sort of saying that, no one really asked these questions. So I think we have to just really bear in mind that there's a huge amount of trauma
Yeah,
that results from migration, from partition, from all of these kinds of things. So I think it's being really mindful of that, being mindful of the intergenerational trauma as well, that, whilst the person that you're speaking to in your family may not have directly experienced it, that that trauma may well have been passed on. So I think that's really important. I think it's just also really important to remember that actually there's also, that I think especially if I think about my grandparents, for example, it's just that the challenging part of it is they don't necessarily see that their story is valuable it's important. And I can just think of so many examples of things my granddad's told me where I'm like, that's amazing. How do you know? And he's just like, what? He's like, what are you talking about?
For them, it's just so normal. No one's a medal and be like, thank you for doing.
Exactly, and they don't get that they're pioneers. But I think it's also and I think the other thing that's really important is just to think about thinking about the historical context, and just making sure that if you are sort of writing if you are writing a story that is based on an account of someone in your family, for example, it's just, I would say, just checking the timeline, just making sure that because I feel like a lot of the time our stories are passed on orally. Definitely, there's not a lot of it has been written down, so there can be confusion as well when it comes to events and things like that. So just kind of just be a good historian, I would say. Just make sure that you're sort of verifying kind of order events and things like that. But I think just being really mindful, being really, really mindful of of sort of the fact that actually we're not necessarily very good at talking about our history necessarily, and so it's just being really mindful of that. But I have no doubt that if there are people out there sort of wanting to pen things, that that they're being sort of cautious and very sort of respectful of all those things.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to ask it in a sensitive way, and also know the right questions to ask. And bless them, because I think, like you said, no one's ever asked them the question. I feel like when I've spoken to people who've got all histories, it's sort of non-stop because so much comes out. Because they've been holding it in, and this is the one time where someone's asked what happened, and then you say. So I think it's sensitivity.
Yeah, I would say a tip from my experience with talking to the Patels anyway is that my family, my granddad especially, they just loved taking photos back then. So in the 70s and 80s, like they have so many photos, and my granddad was brilliant and wrote the date on the back of all the photos, which is incredible. Really helped me. I think it must be an Indian thing, mustn't it? That's what they all did.
Need to know the day.
So that can be really helpful. So I would say, if you've that's what I do. Literally, when I go to see my grandparents, I literally will go straight upstairs. I'll go and get the photos, and I'll just get my granddad to just talk to me about what he remembers, from that day or whatever. And I just think, using anything that you've got, whether it's photos, whether it's you're lucky enough to have sort of footage or anything, just getting a little sort of explanation of all of these things, again, whilst you can, I think is really important.
Yeah, and making a note of it as well.
Yeah.
Amazing. I know you touched on it a little bit in terms of sort of teaching history in schools, but do you think that integrating art and history is an effective education tool? And have you sort of in your teaching have you seen an improvement in the way it's taught?
Yeah, I think classically, history sort of has always used kind of art in a way because of sources. So students are sort of forced to think about and if I think about the skills that it takes when we think about history, we always talk about provenance. With students, we have to teach them about provenance. We have to teach them about where's this source come from, what year was it made, what was the purpose of it, etc. And I feel like those skills are really transferable when students are sort of looking at different types of art as well. Thinking about who is the author of this, who's their intended audience, what is the purpose of it, how does that change how valuable this source is, how does that change how we interpret their words or what they've put in. I think especially if anyone sort of is thinking about their history days at school, they'll probably think, oh yeah, we used to have to label cartoons and paintings and things like that. And I feel like I often start lessons with some kind of art. I'll often start with, especially if you're like, when we especially when we teach like the Mughals, I love showing the students, Mughal art and getting them to think about, what do we learn from this? What does that tell us about? And we have an inquiry that we teach the students called What Mattered to the Mughals. And we learn so much about what mattered to the Mughals through the art that they created, But then it's also important to get the students to think about, okay, well, we're seeing all of these people represented in this art. Who are we not seeing? Or we're not seeing, we're generally not seeing paintings, of peasants, of X, Y, and Z types of people as well. So I think art can be used really, really well. And I also think that if we're thinking about theatre as well, I think theatre can be used really effectively within kind of the curriculum, especially. We always we try, it's so expensive, but we do try to take the kids to the theatre when we can, because it's such a brilliant way of sort of seeing a historical event or time period brought to life, which is incredible. So I think I think history and art goes so well together. They're so complementary, and especially because all throughout time, art has been used by powerful people to sort of portray what they want to do, but it's also been used by so many other types of people as well. And I think especially if we're thinking about women have often used sort of poetry. We talk about a lot of female poets in history, whether we're talking about abolitionists, for example, or lyricists and writers and things like that. So we use paintings a lot actually in the history classroom, because you learn so much, whether it's like classic Tudor portraiture of the Tudors that didn't and obviously those are all like fake news, aren't they? Like they didn't know the Tudors didn't look like that. Those are the paintings that's just how they wanted them to look, and that's fascinating in itself. So same thing with the Mughals, same thing with Georgian paintings showing like little sort of Indian children around them, the paintings of ayahs, of the nannies from the empire. There's this incredible painting that Queen Victoria had made of Maharaja Dalip Singh. Oh God, there's so many incredible paintings throughout time that show us actually that South Asian history has been intertwined with British history for so much longer than people think. Like I was in the House of Parliament the other day, and there's this corridor that you go down, and it's called the Passage of something, and it's got basically paintings of important times in history, right? So it's got like a painting of the Magna Carta being signed or whatever. There's also a painting of a Mughal emperor signing a treaty with this guy called Thomas Roe, and and you go walk past that and you think, see, like even in that time, they knew there was an awareness that South Asian history and British history is so intertwined that it's in a bloody corridor in the House of Commons. It's like it's not like hiding away somewhere.
No,
so it's
there on show.
Exactly. So art is and obviously God, we can talk about I find the idea talking about artifacts with students incredibly, talking about repatriation of artifacts, talking about famous diamonds and things that have been looted. If we think about, you can't think about the empire and not think about artifacts that have been taken from their original home and gifted, quote unquote. For anyone that can't see me, I'm doing quote marks here. Been gifted, and there's just a history of imperialism and the arts is a very fascinating kind of combination to think about. So we kind of pose that to the kids, that we teach them about the concept of repatriation and should things be taken back to their original home. And it's interesting, I remember one of the kids in year 8 put a hand up and said, well, especially if these things have what did she say? She said, if these things have got cultural or religious significance, then they should definitely go back. And I was like, God, this kid is 12, and I think it's incredible.
Especially, it's a good way of everyone learns differently. So some kids do learn by reading textbooks, but I think for more creative people, I think it's a good way to engage them, because it can be easy, they can easily get bored with just reading a textbook. So I think it's so important to have different ways that people will enjoy learning history and not see it as something, oh, why do I have to do this? And I think that's really important to find different ways to to get younger kids age in that. So I think that's amazing that you do bring creativity when you do teach history.
Yeah, it's really important. I think like objects and artifacts and things like that are just, it's such a interesting way in to telling a story.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's a really really good one to end on. I feel like there's so much to talk about. We had like so many hours to do this, but I think, no, thank you for sharing all of your insights. I think it's been I think people will learn a lot from this.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much. We're just going to move on to some I like to end with like some fun.
Yeah.
Okay, number one, what is one country that you want to visit?
Japan.
Okay, amazing.
I was going to say India, but I'm going to India in December, so Japan.
Okay, India and Japan.
Yeah.
What is your favorite pizza topping?
I love mushrooms on a pizza.
Oh my god, I was going to say mushrooms.
Yeah.
Mushrooms. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
I love pineapple on a
Do
pizza.
you?
Yes, I love pineapple with chili.
Yeah, pineapple.
Because I like the spicy. Yeah. It has to be like spicy and sweet. Yeah, love it.
Pineapple. Okay, what was your favorite subject as a kid?
History and classical civilization. I loved as well.
Oh, I love that it was history because I was like,
yes.
Okay, what is your favorite film genre?
Oh, rom-coms.
Is it?
Yep.
Any specific?
Oh, I love My Best Friend's Wedding. I absolutely love. It's so good. It's a classic, like Julia Roberts.
Oh, okay.
It's really good. So yeah, if anyone's not seen My Best Friend's Wedding, it is fantastic. I would highly recommend it. Yeah.
And final one, I like to ask everyone this: what is some advice that you would give to your younger self?
I would say don't worry too much about don't worry about not being a quote unquote stereotypical South Asian woman. I think just don't worry about it, because actually South Asianness, as we know, the kind of South Asian identity has really just opened up and changed so much, and we're breaking stereotypes right now, I think. And I think just don't sweat it too much, and everything's going to be fine.
Fabulous. So then, thank you again for joining me today. I'll let everyone know when this chat will be posted, and we've got some more guests coming up. I'll share who they will be. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.